Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Scripture You Can Relate To podcast, how to make Scripture relevant to your everyday life. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for coming. The Scripture You Can Relate To podcast is produced every Friday by Pastor Ricky Shear. For your convenience, you can download the show notes at www.scriptureyoucanrelateto.com. Come back often, and please add this podcast to your iTunes playlist. Now, let's get on to this week's episode.
Jonah chapter 1 verse 17 says, "Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." The next verse, which is Jonah chapter 2 verse 1 says, "Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God." Many folks argue whether this was a true story or some type of Aesop fable, or was it really a fish, or was it symbolic or an allegory to a different story? Well, there is a right answer, but I'm not here to talk about that today. I want us to focus on what happened next. The text says, "Then Jonah prayed to God." See, there used to be a TV commercial where two people are trying to talk on a cell phone, but the lines are not clear. One person assumes that the other person is not in the right position, so he takes a few steps, and when he thinks he is in a better position, he says, "Can you hear me now?" Well, that's how it is with God and us. God had given Jonah a purpose in life, and Jonah ignored God. I imagine God was saying, maybe he didn't hear me. And God says, well, one of us have to move. Then God says, wait a minute, I'm God. I don't have to move. And so he said, I'm going to have to move Jonah. God needed to get hard-headed Jonah's attention. So he put Jonah in a difficult position and spoke the famous words. He says, "Jonah, can you hear me now?" Well, he does the same thing for you and to you today. He has a way of getting our attention. Oh, it won't be a great big fish, but you will feel drowned out, pulled down, and swallowed up. God not only does this to us individually, but also as a nation or as a community or a church. When I look at the issues in our nation, such as affordable health care, immigration reform, heroin overdose epidemic, criminal justice reform, humanitarian aid and lack thereof, childhood poverty, it is evident that God is asking the question to America, can you hear me now? He has put America in such a place, in a position that he's asking us, can you hear me now? However, we really don't have to look that far. We could look in the mirror. In other words, God has allowed personal storms in your life, whether it be financially, physically, or emotionally, to get your attention. He still wants to use you for a purpose, but yet you're still running from God. God did not immediately chase after Jonah. I imagine God was talking to himself and he says, you know what? I'm going to let this hard-headed man run for a while. He told the lightning, I want you to flash. Then he told the wind, I just want you to blow. He told the thunder, I want you to roar. Then he told the tide, stand up real high, because I've got a man who thinks he can run and thinks he can hide. Now I told you that I like verse 2. Well, it's because it says, then Jonah prayed to God. He came to his senses. Even though Jonah had messed up, he knew if his heart was right, he could pray to God where, anywhere, and at any time. He knew that there was no sin, no mistake that was so great that you cannot ask God for forgiveness and a second chance. You know, sometimes with cell phones, when the signal seems weak, we often move to a place of better reception. And then we look at our phone to see how strong the signal is. I remember when my daughters were out of town and I wanted to talk to them. This is before I switched my cell phone provider. Sometimes I would have to stand in the remote corner of the room just to get a signal. Maybe in the basement, in the garage. I would have to stand in the middle of the backyard in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, just to get a halfway signal. And I would say, how many bars do you have on your phone? And the questions for us to meditate on this week are, what is it that God is trying to get your attention? And secondly, what do you need to do to keep a strong signal to hear Him and for Him to hear you? But above all, remember, it's never too late to pray. Prayer is simply communication or talking to God. The call is initiated by faith in Jesus Christ and His work of dying on the cross for the penalty of sin. Inviting Jesus into your heart, it sets the dial tone for prayer. Well, that concludes this podcast. Our hope and prayer is that this podcast has been helpful to you and you will continue to reflect on it and begin to apply it to your life. For a transcript of this podcast and notes for a journal, visit www.scriptureyoucanrelate.com. Thank you.